All right, welcome everybody to another episode this week. I'm excited to be here and just getting my mic set up. Here we go. Did my first class last Friday, Friday before. Fantastic, super fun, great group of people. I think I got 17 people signed up, which is awesome. So, second class is going to be this Friday, which is I'm going to do a CFO friend is coming and gonna talk, and it's just been awesome. So, super excited about it. I think Rome's working on trying to see if it becomes like a video education kind of series that people could take. So we'll see. I don't know. We'll see how it goes, see how the recording went. Today I want to talk about a talk I gave a few years ago, actually. Oof, this would have been, man, my second forum, which was in Dallas. I did a talk on clouds and dirt. Clouds being kind of like the vision, and dirt being the things that you're digging in and the subject matter expertise. And I got this from a guy that I follow called Gary Vee, and I always thought it was just really good. If you can have vision, but if you don't dig in and figure out how you're going to execute something or figure out the details, like vision doesn't matter. And a lot of the stuff in between doesn't matter, right? You kind of have to push through. And I always love that. I love the analogy and I love kind of the image of it, right? I was at the time I was looking for something with like what's a good example of this? And I came across it was in one of the business books, but it was the story of Amundsen and Scott and getting to the South Pole, right? And it was one of those things at the time, this was in 1911, and it was this big kind of race, if you will, people getting ready and making attempts but not making it. There was a lot of like, this would be a lot of like news coverage, if you will. Like, that's not exactly what we'd call it today, but it would be similar, right? Like a lot of hype around it. But there were very, very different outcomes, but also very different kind of like how they dug in. And I used this to explain it because I thought it was just super interesting about the ways they went about it. Now, mind you, if you don't know the story, Amundsen and Scott left pretty close together. I think maybe they were like 11 days apart, and they had to travel 1,400 miles. And this is 1911, right? They had to take a boat to get there, and then travel 1,400 miles there and back. And it was one of those things where they took different routes, roughly the same routes. And Amundsen made it, right? And Scott, whole camp, a whole party, and didn't make it and they died. Well, they made it, but they came 34 days later, but they also didn't make it back to base. They all died. Pretty crazy because if you think about like they both kind of did a similar exercise, right? But didn't have it all the same outcomes. And I want to talk a little bit about like what happened. One of the things is Scott made some just poor choices. And again, this is an example of not digging into the details. One of the things Scott did was he chose horses over dogs, even though dogs were like well experienced in cold weather, as everyone knows, Diderot. But horses, one of the things that happens to them is they sweat when they get worked. Well, sweat in freezing temperatures is a bad combination. In fact, most of the horses died pretty quickly. It was like power sleds had been invented, so this would be like snowmobiles, like the first generation. But they weren't really tested in this cold of temperatures, and ultimately those things died along with the horses in the first like few days where the engines would crack and just wasn't made for it. Scott had 1 ton of supplies for 17 men. It may sound like a lot, to give you a corresponding, Amundsen had 3 tons for 5 men. And Amundsen also did these like supply depots. And what he would do, and Scott did supply depots too, but what Amundsen would do that was different is he would do a mile in each direction flags. So if they got off course at all, they would see a flag. Scott did a single flag at his supply depot. A single flag. The other thing Amundsen had done, and I explaining kind of like how much he dug in. He lived with indigenous people and he got to know what it is like how they did. And one of the things he knew right away is they don't move very fast, and they don't move very fast because they don't sweat. They can't like you just heard about the horses, right? and he physically tested his body. So he would often be, running long distances and just absolutely testing his body, not eating and seeing what that happened to his body. He ate dolphins to understand if he got shipwrecked, like how would they actually survive, like there's things that just are, starting putting stuff together. Again, digging into the dirt. He did this thing where with the indigenous people, he learned how to dog sled, not just moving slow, but also like loose clothing. I'm looking at my notes because it's been a while since I gave this talk. Loose clothing was also important, and he was really prepared for all conditions and possibilities. Like he was trying to get himself ready to the point where if anything else happened, he'd be ready to kind of pivot. Scott took up on a different approach. He had a lot more men, and he had a bunch of warning signs that would tell you, like, hey, your horses died within the first week or two. Your power sleds didn't work, but he just made the men like just carry him on their, carry it on sleds. And he also started to started running out of food, right? And at the end, he ended up just 10 miles from a supply depot when they stopped, thinking they had missed it or they just weren't close enough. It's pretty crazy. By the time Scott got to the South Pole, Amundsen was only 500 miles away, just 8 days. Amundsen was 500 miles away, but only 8 days from base, returning home. So by the time he got there, he was so far late in the season. They had retrieved Scott's diary, right? So they retrieved his diary and they were trying to, kind of reading his thoughts. And of course they were crazy, but he said over and over again, we had just gotten so unlucky with the weather. But if you think about the nature of like how close they were together and the timing, Scott had probably relatively the exact same weather. And also, what they can piece together is that 56% of the time they actually had really good weather. So it is interesting, like as he goes, he was probably looking for he's looking for ways to like make it that makes sense, right? Like why isn't this working? Well, it's you didn't do enough of the research, right? And I use the quote, which is famously kind of given to Mike Tyson, but it's everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth, right? And I think in this case, the difference is digging in and learning everything he could about how he was going to be able to survive in case things changed or in case things didn't go the way he was thinking it would. I just love that. I love the concept of clouds and dirt. The clouds being your high-end philosophy of what you believe and your vision you're trying to get to, and the dirt kind of being this low-down subject matter expertise that allows you to execute against the clouds. And I think without some of that stuff, like I think about today, you know, I am I'm a visionary, right? Like that's kind of my thing. I'm really good at seeing big picture and figuring out what needs to happen. But I couldn't do that if I hadn't dug in and done a lot of the dirty work for a long time in my career, right? I did 20 years, 15, 20 years of kind of digging in. You can't be a you can't be the visionary if you've never done any of the other work. Now I've learned I'm surrounding myself with people who are digging in because that's just not my role anymore. And it's not what I'm good at, but it's also a point of like you can't do one without the other. And companies today can't just have a visionary and not enough people that execute with subject matter expertise. So that's my take. I loved it. I love the story. I think it's such a good representation of why it's so important to dig into what you're working on. You can't just have an idea. You got to be able to go dig and find out what is really happening. And so often, I think in revenue cycle, how often do we see outside people or outside companies come in thinking they can just solve it and they don't really understand it at all? And once they dig in or don't dig in, they find out like, yeah, it's not easy to solve. So hopefully that was helpful. That was my take for this week. Love to see you all on social. I'm not going to be in San Antonio this week or wherever the HFM thing is, but I'm trying to think where else I'll be next. Not sure. I'm going on a few trips, but nothing planned as far as going to anything but HFMA in June. I'll be there in Denver, I guess. But looking forward to talking to everybody soon. Send a note to the email that Roland will have on this sheet or on this thing and send us some questions or comments. Love it. All right. Thanks, everybody.